Howdy, folks, and welcome to your storm chasing forecast show for Saturday, June 20th. I'm Gabriel Harbor, and I'm joined here with Coach Cameron Nixon.
Hello,
Cameron,
hello.
I'm really excited to chat with you about this setup because we were just talking a few moments ago, and I, in my monkey brain, when it comes to meteorology, was thinking that this was going to be just a cut and dry. Let's go ahead and talk about the main threat and go ahead and get out of here. Maybe we can
Yeah,
catch a movie or something. But you said this is going to be actually a pretty involved video, so I'm really excited to see what you have to say.
yeah. I don't exactly think it's going to be straightforward from a chasing perspective. As much as you might have your favorite target picked out, I have three or four favorite targets. So, well, and maybe that's just me, but we'll go over them and hopefully see which one's the best for you.
I think maybe you are misunderstanding the meaning of the word favorite. You can't have three or four favorites. You got to pick one.
I can though.
Okay, fair. Hey, fair enough. You know what? I'm not going to tell you what you can or cannot do. And you know what? Rather than asking some dumb question to start us off, I'll just let you take it from the top, wherever you think would be best for us to go ahead and
Sure.
start this off.
Yeah, like I told you offline earlier, I think half of this is just me trying to figure out which one my true favorite target is. So hopefully I learned something from this. Hopefully you learned something from this. So what we're dealing with later today is exactly what you want to see in kind of a high plane severe weather event. Finally, we have this broad belt of westerly, southwesterly flow over the high terrain out in the Great Plains, associated with kind of this weak, almost zonal trough here. So again, just nothing too in your face, no big troughs here. We just have this gentle, even moderate southwest flow over most of the plains. So this is already giving me a good feeling. If you go to 700 millibars, you can see that we have a short wave developing. And again, 700 millibars over much of the high terrain is quite near the ground. But you could see this system amplifying here later on in the day. Some pretty strong 700 millibar flow kind of up in the general low-level jet area here. So that's going to contribute to a lot of photograph curvature, especially later on in the evening. Look at this thing kind of explode here, especially southward. So that's definitely something to watch. Your surface pattern will generally be having an amplifying low pressure center as this jet kind of washes over the area. And you can see throughout the day, we start getting a lot of backed flow right up here in the high terrain, Denver to Cheyenne, Chugwater area, which is also good. You also see some pretty broad southerly flow here in the southern Great Plains, which is going to advect a lot of moisture up here. So if you look at our dew points, that starting from yesterday, like we had almost 70-degree dew points up to Childress area. And then we had this kind of secondary pool of moisture here in northern Oklahoma, where we've actually had a lot of rain recently. So both of those kind of axes are going to travel upwards into the high plains. You see, especially if we get a lot of mixing here, we get this corridor confined, almost this warm front feature to northern and northwest Kansas up into the Nebraska Panhandle, and then oozing up into Cheyenne, Chugwater throughout the day. You also see this secondary finger extending from Chugwater into kind of the eastern Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, which also could yield quite a bit of moisture down there as well. 70-degree dew points is nothing to scoff at in the Texas Panhandle, as is mid 60s dew points up into Chugwater. So, really good area of moisture return.
Now, Cameron, that sounds all fine and dandy, but I know for a fact you have a little bit of an inborn fondness for the Texas Panhandle. Are you sure you're not wish casting down there, my friend?
That's actually a really good question. All I know is that when you get 70 to upper 60s dew points, you generally underestimate it, especially with the wrap. If we go over to the NAM, we might even see a little bit more. Actually, no, this is not the case. You see a little bit less. So maybe I am wish casting. Wrap is definitely just a little bit hot for this area, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I think you could be forgiven that with all the other wonderful traits that you bring to the table. Having a little bit of an obsession with the Texas Panhandle is not the worst thing in the world.
I appreciate that, Gabe.
So you did mention the warm front, and that was what stuck out to me the most when I was doing a little bit of analysis beforehand.
Yeah.
Specifically, the SPC talked about potentially storms firing a little earlier in the day than this main line of convection that we're expecting. Do you think anything could be happening, say around 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where that warm front is advancing, the warm advection regime?
Wow. Yeah, let's plug a couple soundings and see at least what the wrap has in store for us on the north side of the warm front. Wow, look at that. Yeah, I've been pulling some really weird, kind of deeply saturated soundings here along the warm front. I'm not actually sure how realistic this is. But it's interesting to see a relatively uncapped environment, even early along this warm front. And that is something that I've seen in various cams. One potential solution is this warm front goes. I'm definitely not opposed to this. I think we might run into some issues with capping and maybe some low-level stratus cloudiness, maybe not the most photogenic of storms, but you get a storm that goes up here and merges with its friends up here, and I really think you have a solid tornado threat along this kind of warm frontal feature.
And my thinking was that maybe the more youthful among us, or the more medicated, and I'll leave it at that among us, might potentially want to go and try something along the warm front earlier in the day, and then if it doesn't work out, still have time to drop south for the main event. So you could have almost a double feature. I think it's Reed who says if you play your cards right.
Yes, yeah, and if you take enough medications, maybe too. But I think it's indeed possible. And so I'll get into this later, but this is something that I know I've talked about a lot on these little discussions throughout the year. What I don't like about this warm front setup is the dry air mass just to the west. We're probably going to be getting some storms here that we don't exactly like and don't exactly want to chase. If you look into eastern Colorado, even at 1, 2 o'clock, we have these very deep boundary layers, minimal convective inhibition here. And if you scroll probably later afternoon and you pluck a sounding out here, I'm guessing they're going to be pretty conducive for convection initiation. So let's see this one. Yeah, so relatively a little bit dry, but relatively steep lapse rates and minimal inhibition. And so a lot of cam outputs that I have seen kind of develop this rash of convection that breaks out here in eastern Colorado and really is not a very good chasing target because you're born into these really high spreads, weaker shear, and they kind of blob out, maybe even become an MCS as they kind of roll into that warm frontal area. So again, I'll show some cam solutions later, but I don't think this warm frontal feature is a guarantee. I think you could potentially pop storms off there and then they get immediately erased by the MCS that comes out of Colorado. But if they pop early enough, yeah, I definitely think there's a solid tornado chance up here.
The Chaser Academy is the best deal in storm chasing, and it costs less than a combo meal at McDonald's. Unlock instant access to exclusive storm chasing presentations, participate in live group coaching sessions, and get answers to all of your questions in the unlimited Q&A chat. Whether you're a beginner, a veteran, or somewhere in between, our expert coaches will help you take your storm chasing experience to the next level. Click the join button below this video or on our profile page and enroll in the Chaser Academy right now. Now, Cameron, I'm not going to stretch you so far as the Great Salt Lake out there in Utah. I know that there is a marginal risk on tap out there, but we're not going to do that. I am going to ask you, though, a little bit further to the northwest, though. Chugwater, a name that many storm chasing enthusiasts are familiar with. What has caught your attention up in that little corner of Wyoming for today?
Yeah, and let me switch over probably to the NAM. I think the NAM is just a little bit more favorable for this general area. I think it has a very classic lead up to an eastern Wyoming, Cheyenne, Chugwater into the Nebraska Panhandle kind of setup. We had this kind of cold front, really weak cold front, come down yesterday, and now we have this low pressure forming over the high plains. And so what that does is induce this kind of narrow channel of moisture up into this area. And for those of us who have chased this area before, this is just an absolutely classic setup for supercells rolling off the high terrain that may or may not be tornadic. And so I can pluck a sounding around 21Z, and you see pretty much exactly why I'm interested in this. Very steep lapse rates, lots of cape here, manageable LCLs, lots of dry air for potentially photogenic supercells, and then really strong deep layer shear. And so I really think we're almost guaranteed to get some kind of storms off here, off the high terrain, rolling into the Nebraska Panhandle here, this beautiful kind of Kimball to Pine Bluffs, Sydney area that might become a tornado threat later on in the evening, maybe even some giant hail. All of this is leading up to a potentially significant supercell potential up here. I think the one thing that gives me pause about this setup is the potential storms that happen in eastern Colorado. And again, I'll show you cams in a bit, but these may or may not ultimately choke off this instability axis for a hypothetical supercell up here. So while I think there is a very solid tornado and structure potential up here, it hinges on the storm remaining discrete and not getting interacted with. And it's possible that this doesn't happen or it doesn't happen soon enough, but it's also possible that this completely wipes this target up here, which would be a big bummer.
It seems like an additional benefit to making that play would be that it's a pretty narrow region that you would have to focus on.
Oh
Just,
yeah.
look at where the moisture convergence and the wind shift is happening, dummy, and then just kind of sit there.
Yeah, these setups can be really straightforward. I know people a couple years ago had the Scotts Bluff tornado. What else was there? There's a Kimball tornado. There's lots of tornadoes in this general area. They are very simple setups. You just go there and just sit and pray and wait. Supercell comes down, and the rest is history.
I know you like to go off the beaten path, so do you think you're going to have the stones to actually pull the trigger on that play today?
I'm going back and forth. I still haven't made up my mind. I think for my purposes, I want to see a tornado and I want to see good structure. I think I am probably most likely to target this area. I do think that we have a solid chance that a supercell lasts long enough in a discrete fashion to pretty much get me everything I've been looking for. However, I still have that sinking feeling that this looks a little squirrely.
I think this is a great opportunity to, number one, plug your Twitter account, because if people want to follow along and see where you ultimately end up today, that's a great place. I believe that's at Cameron J. Nixon, right?
Yes, it is.
Yep, that'll be down in the description below if you people want to check that out. And then also, I think it's a great opportunity to once again reiterate that sometimes the opportunity for a tornado that very few people get to witness is worth the risk of
Yeah.
foregoing an event where everybody and their mother is going to be on the play down further to the southeast. And that's
Yep.
not to say it's not a good region to chase, and you might even still end up going out that way as well. But
Yeah.
there are gonna undoubtedly there will be a lot of cameras, a lot of photos, a lot of videos coming out of that event, and so it will be heavily documented and probably have some convergence that you have to contend with. Versus, I
Oh
don't know how
yeah.
many people are going to be targeting that area, man. I'll be honest with you. Maybe now that we've released this video, you'll have a few more people waving to you out there, but I don't
Yeah.
think that's going to be a super popular play.
That's good. I'd love that personally. I do though. I personally think this is the obvious target. I think this is kind of your classic upslope eastern Wyoming, western Nebraska play. I think this might be the most classic of any target. But of course, it's not where the highest SVC risk is, which a lot of that risk is for potential upscale growth. So definitely pay attention to that.
Okay, I was promised some Texas Panhandle discussion a little bit later, so I think it's high time we ventured down to the south. And it's kind of crazy, actually, when you think about the variability in terms of potential targets for you today. You could be as far south as the Texas Panhandle. You may end up almost rubbing elbows with Brendan me up there in
Yep.
Chugwater. So it's tell people what you're seeing down there in Texas.
Very much could. Yeah. So this is definitely, I think this is the hipster play of the day. And you have a broad region. You really don't have like a sharp, well-defined dry line, particularly earlier, but you do have this very well mixed and moist air mass. And if I bring up a sounding here, you can see what I like about this. Very deep inverted V profiles, lots of moisture here. I think it's very possible that we get convection initiation west of this kind of, I guess, pseudo double dry line. And then, of course, you have this moistening air mass east of kind of this double dry line feature, where you have something like that looks like this. Really dry air, lots of Cape Aloft, and a beautiful kind of half circle hodograph here with really strong surface flow. And so this continues into the evening. You actually get renewed moisture advection. I know Gabe was calling me out on my wish casting here, but I think the wrap kind of had the upper ceiling on potential dew points. And you can look at what that looks like. And generally, this is definitely enough for a very well structured, extremely photogenic supercell. Maybe even squeezing out a tornado or two if we were able to increase our low level dew points. This photograph is just magical. It's been responsible for a lot of mothership and LP supercells. And I think the thing that I like about this most is that it is at the tail end of all the other convection. I think we will not get many storm interactions. For better or for worse, I think we will have a relatively discrete supercell that lasts quite a while down here. So whether or not it's kind of surface based enough to produce tornadoes, I think is almost kind of inconsequential at this point. This might be an extremely worthy structure potential if this were to happen. So I'll throw up now some CAM solutions. kind of highlighting each of these kind of potential targets and their failure modes. Of course, we'll start with the HRRR. And you can see it does have this eastern Wyoming Pine Bluffs target. And it also has this one thing that you'll see in common is that it had all these cams have this upscale growing slop out of Colorado. No warm front, no prefrontal warm front storms her. And it's possible that the cold pool from this system starts interacting with the supercell, might make it briefly tornadic, but then kill it kind of by sunset. Possibly even some more development afterward. But you do still see, and even in the HRRR, this is impressive, a multi-hour supercell kind of down here, which the HRRR really struggles in these dry environments. So seeing something like this down there definitely piques my interest. But looking at the HRRR, I'm debating between these two targets. If you look at the NAM, has a very different story. It really struggles to produce this kind of Wyoming target, and then it blows up this convection such that it basically does not give this thing even a chance to become kind of discrete. You just get this messy line and kind of ultimate failure mode of this target up here. What it does have is this supercell down here, the panhandles, really raging on into the evening, 2-3Z, which would be beautiful for golden hour and blue hour photography. Another thing it does have, though, is this warm front actually going up here down in southwest Nebraska near McCook. You see these prefrontal cells going up, but then, of course, you see all this slop to its west. So if it does last long enough to produce a tornado, it will quickly kind of become absorbed in the big blob. And then if I look at maybe some RRFS, if we go out long, probably similar story. I think RRFS actually had every single target working out. You have the Cheyenne kind of Kimball play. You have some semblance of warm frontal convection, though I think this is kind of elevated within this kind of MCS thing. It has the eastern Colorado slop, and then it has the southern Panhandle supercell, again, raging on in the evening without any of these storm interactions. So really complex. These are kind of my favorite events, and I think my brain is just pulled in a bunch of different directions. But I think it's all about what you're after. If you want that best chance of a daytime tornado and structure, I would definitely recommend somewhere up here or along the warm front. I think you could definitely have a hipster play here or a boomer bust, so to speak, before these grow upscale. And then if you are a structure snob like I am, I really think the southern target could be pretty viable if that were to happen.
Remember to check out those links in the description below, and then watch another video.